So one of the things that we've seen during the Trump era is that they are actively and purposefully hiring people who are super far right and openly white nationalist and white supremacist, okay? We covered this the other day where there was this guy who ran the Department of Labor Twitter account, open Nazi, and he got promoted as a result of that to now run the DHS Twitter account. There's been other examples as well. So it's kind of disturbing when it's no longer a problem for you to be an open white supremacist. It reminds me of the Youth Republican group chat, which, by the way, when they say youth, they mean 40 years and under. Kind of wild. But the Youth Republican group chat, they get caught saying stuff like, I have a little bit of a Nazi streak in me, and J.D. Vance immediately comes out there and defends them. And, nobody loses their position. This is where we are now with the right. This is who they are. Make no mistake about it. And so Trump nominated a legit white nationalist for a top post at the State Department. And here he is getting grilled by Congress. And understand something here. You put these idiots under just a little bit of scrutiny, and they crumble. They immediately fall apart. They immediately collapse. They don't have the intellectual horsepower to actually defend their worldview in a serious way. So let's start with this one here. This is Chris Murphy talking to Jeremy Carl, the white nationalist. And this, steers the train right into a goddamn ditch. Watch this. Here we go.
Tell me how you define white identity and what you think is being erased about white identity.
Certain types of Anglo-derived culture that comes from our history.
Like what?
Let me think about this. Senator, I would say if you were to look at the book by one of your former Senate colleagues, Born Fighting, about the sort of Scotch-Irish military culture and certain, pride that went with that, that would be one example. Obviously, you can have sub-elements of that culture. You could have Italians, you could have Irish, and those are in many ways more.
But you're worried about white.
Okay, what does that even mean? Italians, when they came over here, weren't considered white, and Irish, when they came over here, weren't considered white. So by your own examples, there is no, white culture that's under attack, right? And the goalpost for whiteness keeps moving. So it didn't used to include Irish and Italian, now it includes Irish and Italian. It's almost like it's totally fucking made up, and it changes with time, and you're too dumb to fucking realize that.
You're now retreating to ethnic identity. You don't speak about ethnic identity. You speak about white identity. So tell me the values that stitch together white identity and that make it different than black identity.
I would say that the white church is very different than the black church in terms of its tone and style on average. Food ways could often be different.
And those
music could be different.
And those are being erased.
Music could be differently if you look at the Super Bowl halftime show, which was not in English this year.
So our ability to access white churches or white food or white music is being erased?
Look, people are laughing in the background at him. You see this? They're laughing in the background. Here we go. Watch.
Churches or white food or white music is being erased?
I am concerned with the majority common American culture that we had for some time that through particularly mass immigration, I think has become much more balkanized, and I think that weakens us. And again, I'm not running away from that comment. I'm not apologizing for it.
Well, I'm way over my time. I think you're struggling to answer this question, right? Because underlying your beliefs is a sentiment that white culture is just simply better.
You know what the other thing is? And you see this with Nick Fuentes too, right? He's a white nationalist and a white supremacist, but he's also a Catholic. And he also seemingly doesn't understand that, hey, you do know in history, in U.S. history, Catholics were otherized. They were not part of the dominant WASP culture, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. If you're a Catholic, like JFK got elected, Catholic president, people genuinely were fearful of that and bigoted against that among the Protestants, the WASPs, because they thought, oh my God, he's going to be taking his marching orders from the Vatican. So not only were Irish otherized, Italians were otherized, Catholics were otherized. Again, because these categories are fucking made up and they change with time, right? I feel like when I was born, there was no category of white Hispanic. Then as I was maybe a young teen, there started to become this category of there's white Hispanic and non-white Hispanic. And why? Because the categories are just fucking changing all the time. It's this phantom thing that he's trying to cling to, and it's just fucking stupid. But we're not done yet because this keeps going. So now we have Chris Murphy again, and he's going to keep grilling.
A year ago, were white Americans the most discriminated against group in the United States? You said it. So
yeah. Senator, no, certainly this is my belief. I'm not running away from that. I think that while, of course, all races in different contexts can be subject to really severe discrimination, that when we look at our legal structures, white Americans are often very disfavored in overt ways. We're seeing this in the Small Business Administration, many other places.
So your belief is that white Americans face more discrimination, at least prior to the Trump administration fixing this, than black Americans?
On average, Senator, yes, that's correct, and I'm not running away from that statement at all.
Literally just one fact can blow up this whole narrative. They've done studies where you have a resume with a traditional white-sounding name and a traditional black-sounding name, and the white-sounding name gets hired way more often than the black-sounding. It's not even close. It is not even close. There's a pay disparity, too, if you have a black-sounding name versus a white-sounding name. There's been, detailed sociological studies on this, and the results are always the same. Look at intergenerational wealth, for example. If you're born into a white family, you're just... on average, you're going to have way more wealth just inherited from your family because black people couldn't even fucking have property in if somebody's my age and they have a grandfather, that guy wasn't even able to have property for a long time, right? So there's this massive head start among, non-black people, non-people of color. And he's just disregarding all of that and acting if there were some minor attempts to try to ameliorate those ills, like affirmative action, for example, he views that as the bigger injustice than slavery and redlining and economic disenfranchisement, which happened all along. It's just so stupid. And part of me struggles to believe that they even believe this, right? It seems so performative. I'm not backing away from that belief. You can't even articulate a good argument in favor of the belief. So how can you not back away from it? You can't defend it in even the most simplest terms. All right, but I still got more. So here is Tim Kaine, and Tim Kaine really puts the knife in here and twists. Let's watch.
One of the things you said was American whites are victims of a cultural genocide. Where to start? So you'd agree with me, wouldn't you, that whites are pretty well represented in the United States Senate?
They are well represented in this body, yes.
And how about in the House of Representatives?
Senator Kaine, I don't have those particular numbers. However,
but you would agree that they're pretty well represented in the House of Representatives?
Senator, I would, again, thank you for the question. I would point out that there were no white Protestants by birth in the 25 cabinet members under Joe Biden.
How about in the ranks of American presidents throughout history, including now pretty well represented whites?
Senator.
And how about in the ranks of vice presidents during American history? Now, whites pretty well represented in that group, right?
Senator, thank you again for the question.
Yeah. I don't think it's hard. How about on the United States Supreme Court? Throughout our history, and including now, whites are pretty well represented on the United States Supreme Court, correct?
I think obviously historically, I would of course agree with you. Of course, the vast majority of Americans were white at that time. It's now a much more diverse society.
Let's focus on right now. How about in the ranks of American governors? You think whites are pretty well represented?
I would just have to look at the numbers. I don't know.
Okay, how about this? In the ranks of CEOs of major corporations today, you think whites are pretty well represented?
Senator, thank you for the question. I suspect that they're probably...
By the way, you see his strategy? He definitely planned this beforehand, or somebody told him beforehand. Don't be like Pam Bondi. Do not go in there all argumentative. The Dow's at 50,000. Did you know that? It's okay that they're raping kids because the Dow's at 50,000. It's okay that Mossad has infiltrated our government and is controlling our president because the Dow's at 50,000. Definitely they told this guy hey man, there's this trick that if you do, it'll work. It'll butter them up a little bit. It'll soften them up. But if you just say, thank you for that question, Senator, before every answer, no, it comes across as fucking disingenuous. And homie's getting barbecued here.
How about in the ranks of high-income people? And we can define it however you want. Let's just say top 10% of wealthy Americans. You think whites are pretty well represented?
Senator, thank you for the question. They would certainly be underrepresented with respect to Asian Americans, but they would be overrepresented with respect to other groups.
A cultural genocide, that's a stiff claim. And it's an interesting one.
By the way, I should point out, this is a point that white supremacists like to bring up all the time. They think they have one when they bring this up in defense of eugenics and race science. Well, actually, technically, whites aren't even at the top because Asians are even higher when it comes to IQ. So I'm not even being a white supremacist when I say that race and IQ matters because I'm saying Asians are above us. But here's the problem with that. If you look at Asian Americans in this country, their income is tied to which particular kind of Asian they are, right? Because there's more higher income Asians that come from certain Asian countries, right? And then there's other countries here where they're refugees and they're lower income Asians. So they have a much lower average income or median income in this country. So one of these talking points that they bring up, it actually, if anything, when you get into the specifics, it backs up more of a class analysis than a race analysis. That if you come here with a leg up and you're from a family that already has wealth, that statistically you do very well economically in this country, but if you come from, a lower income family from a more poor Asian country and you're a refugee, it's much harder for you to climb that economic ladder because you start very low on that ladder in the first place, right? And forgive me, I read this article years ago, and I don't remember which Asian countries are the ones that, hey, it's more high income from this country, it's more low income from this country. But I think I do remember, I think it was Vietnamese immigrants came here more as refugees, so they didn't come here with a pot to piss in. And so for them, it's been harder to climb that economic ladder.
It's kind of a white victimhood argument, but if I remember my colleague, Senator Rosen, she was reading comments to you where you had been saying, man, Jews play the victim. Jews like to be the victim. And yet you're making a claim that whites are victimized by a cultural genocide when all the statistics would say, not just in history, but today, that whites are very well represented at every level of every institution. They're very well represented in the incomes of Americans. And that doesn't mean each person is high income or each person is a Supreme Court justice. But you could look institution after institution in this country, and the facts completely rebut the notion that whites are victimized by a cultural genocide.
Absolutely cooked them. Now, by the way, since we live in a timeline where nothing matters and power is power, okay, look at this. Peter Baker, New York Times, White House stands by State Department nominee who complains that white Americans are increasingly second-class citizens and warns of white erasure and says the Jews love to see themselves as oppressed. So even given that embarrassing performance, the humiliation, the inability to argue for his perspective at all, never mind just the open white nationalism, white supremacy, Nazism even, perspective, well, they go, we don't care, we're going to stand by him. Oh, did he get barbecued and deep fried by literally every single person who grilled him on? We don't care. We're going to support him still. Understand, guys, when somebody tells you who they are, fucking believe them. The Republicans are screaming through a megaphone directly in your face who they are day in and day out. Do not shove your head in the sand. Do not pretend like they aren't this. They are this. They are now open, out of the closet, brazen, happy white supremacists and white nationalists and Nazis. It is what it is.
Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.